From ELCA Advocacy, this is Here I Pod. There's so much happening in our communities every week and every day that are impacted by policies at the local, state, and federal levels. Here I Pod will focus on one aspect of what's happening each episode by talking with faith-based advocates, as well as providing steps that you can take in your own advocacy efforts. In this episode, our host Regina Banks speaks with Silas Kulkarni, Director of Strategy and Advocacy for ELCA Witness and Society. They discuss how the ELCA has advocated at the federal level around budget reconciliation and rescission bills, as well as the opportunities for advocacy during August recess, when members of Congress return to their districts and are available for meetings with their constituents. We will then hear from Reverend Michael Wilker about how advocacy can start at August recess and lead to even more opportunities throughout the year to engage on issues that concern you and your community. Here's Regina to get us started.
Good afternoon. This afternoon I have with me Silas Kulkarni, who is the Director of Strategy and Advocacy for ELCA Advocacy. Good to be with you this afternoon, Silas.
Great to be with you, Regina.
So can you tell us a little bit about your role at the ELCA?
I'm in charge of our federal Witness and Society. By Witness and Society, we mean our engagement with federal government and lawmakers, policymakers. So I lead the issue area specialists who you've heard on other episodes of the podcast, and I have a broader strategic role in helping guide the team towards long-term impact for the people we serve.
Great. So we're meeting today at noon-ish time, Sacramento time, on Thursday, July 17th, 2025. Can you give us an idea of what has been going on in Washington, D.C. from your perspective on this date? His eyes just got wide.
I also took a deep breath. I think it's hard for me to convey to people outside of Washington the scale and scope of changes which have just passed in this Congress. There were two major bills just passed. One called a reconciliation bill, basically a bill all about taxes, spending, and the federal budget, with a heavy focus on the domestic dimensions of policy. Another called a rescissions bill, which is a little complicated, but it basically means a bill to undo funding that was previously committed by Congress. That one has most of its primary impacts on the international, especially foreign aid landscape, though it also has some domestic portions. Between those two bills and things that have been happening through the executive branch, no way to describe these bills other than generation defining.
Silas, can you give us a few concrete examples of what finally made it into that legislation that you find so generation defining?
Yeah. So on the domestic side, in the big budget tax and spending bill, we have the largest cuts ever to almost all the core services that the government provides to the most vulnerable citizens. SNAP cuts of an unprecedented degree. We're talking hundreds of billions. Medicaid cuts, which are approaching $1 trillion. The whole federal budget, you're talking $7 trillion. I mean, these are unimaginably large cuts. We're talking about an expansion in the apparatus around ICE, detention, deportation, a border wall that is, for example, tripling or even quadrupling the budgets for ICE, for Customs and Border Patrol, with a particular focus on a huge amount of money going to build detention facilities to hold well over 100,000, maybe 200,000 human beings in what will then be the biggest federal prisons functionally, as well as the police force through those to gather the people who will be then housed there and then sent to other places. And the climate side, after a climate bill, which was the largest investment in mitigating climate change in our history in the previous administration.
The Inflation Reduction Act, that's what you're talking about.
Yes, that's right. the climate provisions have almost all been rolled back, including many credits that churches are using for building solar panels, for other climate adaptation measures, disaster response, things like that. Many of those are being canceled midstream, phased out very shortly. On the international side, we saw through the executive branch in March, Secretary Rubio announced that 83% of the foreign aid programs through USAID had been canceled. 83%. And then in this rescissions bill that just passed, where they basically take back money that Congress committed to spending before it's spent, we're talking about another roughly 14% of the aid budget. There's functionally no foreign aid left. We're talking about well over 90%, which is going to be gone from that. And we're talking about money that goes to things like feeding women and children who have been displaced by the massive war in Sudan. We're talking about money that goes to providing dialysis, oxygen care for people who will die in very short order. Many of them have already died in countries around the world and in places where our companion churches have long-standing relationships. We can't get into all the detail now, but we will undo in these sets of changes work that has taken 30, 40, 50 years for ministries like ELCA World Hunger, to fight poverty, to respond to disasters. It's hard to overstate how consequential these changes are going to be and how quickly they happened in this new year.
Silas, that was devastating to hear you lay out as a litany. And we've had conversations with other members in the ELCA ecology about small pieces of that. Do you feel like the ELCA had a meaningful opportunity to influence this legislation?
I don't think anybody had sufficient opportunity to influence this legislation when it comes to people outside of the political parties, outside of the narrow section within the political parties that had control over what was going into them. If you're going to have the largest cuts in Medicaid, in other words, medicine, medical care for people who are working class or poor in this country, ever since their creation, you would think that you would want to take more than a few days to process that. To put this in context, going into the final vote on this, no one knew how much the cuts were going to be. When we went to offices to talk to them, repeatedly we heard that the final number hasn't been announced. We can't tell you for sure. We're waiting to see. We're opposed to Medicaid cuts. We heard that very clearly over and over again. And the hearings, the votes happened lightning fast after the text was announced. On the House side, they have a rule where you're supposed to give members of Congress 24 hours to read bills before there's votes. They had to violate their own rules through a loophole where they passed a bill that said more stuff is coming, and then amended it a day later to include all the content, and then voted on it the same day. In other words, the members of Congress didn't have time to read the bills. Their staff didn't have time to read the bills. There are no members of the public who had a chance to read these bills, or what happens more often, have people who engage with this, read the bills, digest them, and tell them what's in it before the vote happened. In another case, they were holding hearings at 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. the morning before the votes were happening. I don't know who is expected to listen to what's happening, show up, say something. Despite that, I am incredibly proud of the work of the team here in the Witnesses Society office in Washington, D.C. I can't tell you how hard they worked and how they found ways to show up in lightning fast response time, in difficult circumstances, to make our voice be heard to the degree it was possible to do so under circumstances that nobody really should have to do when trying to speak the voice of people in churches or in communities.
Silas, do you have any examples of the way that the ELCA was able to meaningfully influence this legislation? Perhaps it might be averting the very worst of a particular situation. I don't even know.
Yes. Like, just to give you concretes of what we did and some of the impacts it had, when the major tax spending and budget bill went through, our staff held dozens of meetings with congressional staff ahead of time. In many cases, as constituents who were in their districts, who were ELCA members, pastors, other clergy or leaders, were in those meetings speaking to their values and voices and the core social teachings of our faith. Then, as we neared the votes, we arranged targeted meetings with people whose votes might matter, with constituents from their district to speak about these issues, to stand up for people who are experiencing hunger or homelessness or severe disease, disability, economic hardship. Those targeted meetings were followed by messages to all the chief of staffs and legislative directors in every House office, in every Senate office. Our staff personally visited and dropped off stories from ELCA members around the country that we collected to every single House office the day before the vote. Everyone was visited in person by a member of our staff, 435 of them. Every single Senate office was visited within the next few weeks, some before the vote on the tax bill and some before the vote on the international spending withdrawals. They all heard from us. Many of them said, we haven't heard from any Christians on this side of these issues.
Silas, can you give us an example of some of the stories that have been told from a domestic perspective?
I'll just read you one. From Pastor Valenti of Faith Lutheran Church in Virginia. Every week, I get calls from folks who need help with rental assistance and groceries. These are people who are working and are just $100 or $200 short. They are already struggling. I'm grateful to serve a congregation that is able to say yes most of the time, but our emergency assistance fund keeps getting emptied as the calls and asks increase. I'm worried that with major cuts to these programs, my congregation will not be able to meet the needs of our neighbors, and things will get much worse for folks who are already scraping by. That is a story that we have heard over and over again and that lawmakers are hearing from us. It's a story that is true to our ministries and why we care about food assistance like SNAP, aka food stamps.
Tell us about a couple of the concrete wins that mattered during this process.
They feel sometimes small compared to the losses, which were extremely large, but they still matter. Small actions of the federal government are still large in the context of everyday people because it's such a large institution with such money and power at its disposal. So one that our staff specifically played a central role in preventing. There was a provision that was introduced as standalone legislation previously, which on its face sounds good and in its reality is very, very concerning. It was titled by some groups the Nonprofit Killer Bill, HR 9495. But the basic idea was that it would give the Secretary of the Treasury unilateral power to withdraw the tax exemption of nonprofits based on his sole assessment that they were terrorist supporting organizations. Everybody's against terrorism, right? But what we are not for is putting that kind of power in the hands of one person, particularly when it can be used and unambiguously will be used by administrations of both parties to target nonprofit organizations who take viewpoints opposed to the policies of a given party in power. Our church itself could be caught up in that. Many of our congregations could be caught up in that. We have advocated for equal rights for all people in the Holy Land, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whether they are Palestinian, whether they are Israeli. We've advocated for equal rights generationally. We have had a hospital in Jerusalem since World War II that we support from our core faith values. But it is unambiguous that people who have supported Palestinians in their quest for equal rights have been accused of supporting terrorism. That's a recurring theme, not new, but really acute now. So this church, if we give money to the Augusta Victoria Hospital in East Jerusalem, which serves Palestinians, could be called terrorist supporting if the term is being applied loosely, subjectively, in a way targeted towards the political preferences of the party in power. That's why they called it a nonprofit killer bill.
What was the outcome?
It failed as standalone legislation in the past Congress. It was brought back in this bill, which is a very strange place to put it. It appeared literally overnight. And the only reason our staff noticed was because they've been so diligently following late night hearings and things that they saw as they were reading text. They said, wait a second, this text that came as a separate bill and didn't succeed last time is suddenly back in this bill. It's supposed to be about taxes and spending because it's loose connection to IRS status. And our staff, within the same day, generated a one-page summary of what the bill was, what its consequences would be, why it would be harmful to people of any political party and any nonprofit or church, printed it out, and showed up in the halls of Congress, handing it out, talking to staffers at every one of the people who were on the relevant committee immediately, only because of the diligence in monitoring these things were just finding their way to bills last minute. That provision was taken out at the next step. I think it was within a day. And our relationship with some of the congressional staffers, we heard back, why did it get taken out? They said, because we heard from stakeholders that they were concerned about it. And that preserves the freedom of churches to serve the people that they feel called to serve, to have independence from political influence. That's incredibly valuable. It pales in comparison to $1 trillion in cuts from Medicare, but it matters a lot for the long-term health of our society. I'll give you another one that really matters. ELCA and the broader faith community has been advocating since it was established for a program called PEPFAR. PEPFAR is an acronym, but what it means is it's the presidential initiative related to HIV/AIDS, primarily focused on sub-Saharan Africa. That program, established by George W. Bush and supported in a bipartisan way since the early, has saved in a documented way 25 million people's lives. And those programs, in some cases, are administered by churches. There's literally Lutheran churches in East Africa caring for orphans born with HIV and giving them medicine that prevents them from developing AIDS and dying.
Yeah.
The advocacy of the ELCA and others on this specific issue has led to, in that bill that withdrew almost all of the international aid money, creating a carve-out to protect some of the significant amount of the money for that program. That's a big win. That's a lot of human lives.
I'm not going to embarrass you or me by asking, have you read all million pages in this bill?
You don't have to embarrass me. I'm not embarrassed. No human could have done so. Our staff is busily doing so now.
Are there plans to get a summary of what has transpired out into the hands of synods, congregations, church leaders?
Staff here in the Witnesses Society office is preparing summary briefing about some of the major provisions that passed and their implication for some of the social teaching cause that we care about. They're preparing those memos right now. There will be a blog post that gives a summary of what was in these bills, how it connects to our social teaching, and what the church does in our ministries.
The main invite for you in having this discussion here on July 17th was that typically ELCA Advocacy does a robust push for people to engage in advocacy during the August recess. Can you give us a brief understanding of what August recess is, and then what the plan is for ELCA Advocacy and those who are plugged in for this year's August recess?
So recess, like when you're in kindergarten and you get a break to go out to lunch and play for a while, it's like a break. Congress takes a break every year in August for the members to rest, but also to be back home and connect with what should be their foundation, which is their constituents. And typically members of Congress will be available for in-person meetings with the member themselves. Their staff might be available in the districts to accept walk-ins, and they'll hold town halls. This is a great time for advocacy because many people can't travel to Washington, D.C., but they can go to a congressional office that's in their district or to a Senate office that's not too far, and they can show up there. They can go to a town hall that's being held, meet their representative or their senator in person. So it's a great time to influence them while they're back home. Those are the voices they care more about than anybody in Washington, D.C.'s voices, because those are voices that relate to their electoral fortunes.
Silas, what is a town hall?
A town hall is a meeting where an elected representative has an open door policy. Many people can come, sign up to ask a question, talk to the member, and voice their questions and concerns to their representatives.
If an ELCA congregation or leader should desire to go to a town hall meeting, what should they plan to do?
Well, it's not up for us to tell people how to engage with their representatives, but if you're looking for good models, you should Google YouTube of Pastor Mike Wilker
talking at a town hall. I think he was talking about Afghans who had aided the U.S. in their immigration status. It's an issue that he chose, not something somebody else told him to. He spoke up about it. He was respectful, knowledgeable, and he influenced the conversation.
Silas, it's been clear during our conversation that you are proud of the work that we do together. You're proud of the values that we bring to the table in these public discussions, but that you're also really disappointed about where we are as a nation and as policy makers and policy influencers. The bills have already passed. The money has been clawed back. The programs are already in danger. What is your workflow plan?
There's a bunch of dimensions to the answer to that question. I guess the first thing I'll say is I'm not disappointed. I'm heartbroken. The people affected by these are not anonymous numbers to the members of this church. They are our friends. They are our colleagues. They are our fellow church members around the world and domestically through in sister churches. They are people that show up in congregations needing help at food pantries. They are members of these congregations themselves who are retirees on Medicaid and Medicare because their retirements are not sufficient to pay their medical bills. They are federal workers who work for this church. These are real people in real relationship with us. And the ones who are not in relationship with us are every bit as valuable to God as those we know. It is heartbreaking. I cannot put any other words to it. Some estimates are that several 100,000 people will die in the next 6 months in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, due to the withdrawal of federal aid. That's not the only place and not the only amounts, but just that. I also want to say, God finds a way when there is no way. I have many times when causes I've cared about, not just now, but in general, have gone the opposite of the direction that I hoped and believed they should go. I take some solace in the idea that God's power is made perfect in weakness. And when we become weak, we have to recommit ourselves to God's strength, which subverts the wisdom and the status of the world. Everybody has a role to play in witnessing in society. We're witnesses to the gospel. Our first call is for people to continue to witness. And what does that mean? You asked me about August recess. I will not tell you what you should think about a given bill. I have thoughts. We have social teaching. I will tell you what those say. But you have to make your own choices, and people of faith do disagree, and we respect that in this church and in general in our country. But I will say, if something that has just happened in these major changes concerns you, or if you're really happy about it, I don't want to discount those disagreements. Now, during August recess, is a wonderful time to show up. Show up to a town hall. Ask to schedule a meeting with your member of Congress. If they're not available, ask to schedule a meeting with their staff. Feel free to stop by their office for a drop-in. It's a very normal thing. They may not meet with you, but showing up and saying, hey, I wanted to come talk about these bills that just passed, the reconciliation bill, the rescission bill, foreign aid, domestic hunger, immigration, whatever issue you care about. Show up and raise your questions, ask them, tell them what you care about, witness to it from the gospel. Not just, hey, I'm partisan of one sort or another. But this is how I read the scriptures and why this matters to me in my church.
Yeah. Silas, the most common question in my inbox right now is from rostered leaders, members, leaders in our ministries that say, okay, I've been watching the news. I know these changes have occurred. How long before people who have been affected by these changes run out of other options and knock on my church's door, my ministry's door, looking for help?
The legislation is specifically designed so some of the most drastic cuts to care for people who are in poverty, care for people who are working class and struggling to meet needs of food or medicine. The most drastic cuts happen right after the next election cycle. It depends, different programs, different times. The question about impact is the fundamentally more important one, which is impacts are already happening in many ways. If you live internationally and you are in a community that serves or was served by foreign aid programs, there are many documented deaths already of very stark character. If you have a church ministry that's domestic here in the United States, people are already seeing people come to homeless shelters, to food pantries and much higher numbers. And so when these cuts kick in after the next election, or a little bit later, depending on which specific cuts we're talking about, the number of people is going to skyrocket. They'll see it in maybe 2 years, some cases 3, 4 years. What we'll also see is one of the biggest underlooked components of the big bill that just passed is how massive the expansion of ICE, Border Patrol, and detention facilities. It is far beyond anything that could be reasonably conceived of as focusing on violent criminals. We're talking millions of people. Deportation on the scale of millions of people has happened over administrations. The speed and scale of it is dramatically increased. There's no version of this scale of funding that will not be facilitating pulling people out of families, pulling people out of communities.
I saw reports on social media that unmarked white vans at Home Depot literally around the corner from my house. As a Californian, I know that the question of when these effects take place is very dependent on where you live and what you look like, because it may have already knocked on your door.
There's a part of your question which I didn't answer properly, which is to say, not just when the effects of policy are going to come through, but when the dramatic increases are going to come through. If people feel that the degree of deportation and detention that's happening now is too much or too quick and too aggressive, it is trivial compared to the expansions that's coming.
Silas, given the state of where we are and everything we've discussed, what is the opportunity for advocacy now?
The greatest opportunity is to engage in the ELCA Advocacy Network. Simply go to www.elca.org/advocacy and sign up to get involved. You'll get added to an email list that will send regular updates with items for action. If you want to be even more engaged, not just responsive, but proactive, maybe you want to organize a local group that wants to speak up about a given issue that's important to your congregation or your ministry, please sign up on that email list, send an email to washingtonoffice@elca.org, and think about how you and your church could be witnesses to what you understand the gospel to be and what the social teaching of this church has taught and shaped you in.
Silas, where have you seen the gospel recently in your work?
The gospel is not just one thing, holds so much within it. The way I understand the gospel is God came down to be with us and to help us to go up. God didn't say, you come to me, you be perfect, you do all the commandments of the law, and then I will have a relationship with you. God did not set a boundary on God's love. And so where do I see that in our work? I see that in those who say, the church is not just for the righteous, the church is for the sinner. And if the church is for the sinner, we're coming to you, and we do not care what wrongs you've done. We still love you because God loves you. When I see the care that's extended in our advocacy to engage the members of the church and the people who are served by the ministries, to hear voices of our colleagues in our global Lutheran fellowship, and not just our colleagues, but our neighbors. When I hear the voice of accompaniment with our ministries among diverse cultures and communities, and how that voices of different members of this community who are grieving, hurting, or afraid come into their advocacy, Congress, through work that we facilitate, or through their stories being lifted up about what's happening in their churches, that's where I see us witnessing to God's presence with people, through our presence with people, us witnessing to God's care for those who are not being listened to, through our care and our speaking up for them.
Silas Kulkarni, Director of Strategy and Advocacy for the ELCA, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Regina.
Now here's Reverend Wilker to share about his advocacy experiences.
Hello, friends and colleagues in Christ. I'm Mike Wilker, pastor of First Lutheran Church in Decorah, Iowa, on the homelands of the Meskwaki, Dakota, and Ho-Chunk nations. I want to share with you about how our church's call to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God can take shape in our civic engagement, particularly during August congressional recesses, when our representatives and senators return home for town halls. Last summer, I attended a town hall with Representative Ashley Hinson, but I didn't come empty-handed. I brought with me a traditional Hmong textile that hung outside my office, or the pastor's office at First Lutheran Church, for over 50 years. This beautiful piece was created by Pa Li Vu, a part of a Southeast Asian refugee family that our congregation helped resettle in the 1970s after the Vietnam War. The Vu family story embodies why we engage in advocacy. Just last year, Pa Vu and one of his now adult children returned to visit our congregation. When Pa Vu entered our sanctuary, he fell down on his knees at the altar rail to thank God for mercy and protection and for the hospitality of Lutheran congregations and ministries. At that first town hall, I held up Pa Lee's artwork and told this story to Representative Hinson and the small audience that gathered there. Then I made a connection to today. Representative Hinson, just as we welcomed our Vietnamese and Hmong refugee allies after that war, I urge you to support our Afghan allies who served alongside American forces and now need our protection. Last summer, she said she'd look into the issue. But here's what I learned. Advocacy doesn't end when the microphone is turned off. This summer, Representative Hinson held another town hall, this time with nearly 500 people in attendance. Many issues were raised, and finally it was my turn. I stood up, held up Pa Lee's art hanging again, and Representative Hinson remembered me. I briefly retold the Vu family story for all to hear and renewed my request to Representative Hinson to support Afghan allies and refugees. After the town hall, I posted a photo of Representative Hinson and me with Pa Lee's wall hanging on Facebook, and I invited others to learn about and support our Afghan allies who are now refugees in Iowa. Then I followed up by connecting with Global Refuge and Lutheran Services in Iowa for a Zoom conversation with the representative staff members. That 15-minute phone call was also productive. We invited Representative Hinson to visit with Lutheran clergy and lay leaders and Afghan refugees themselves in Northeast Iowa later on this summer and fall. Then I wrote a press release for our local newspaper, restating our case for supporting Afghan refugees. The newspaper contacted Hinson's office and gave them an opportunity to respond publicly. This experience taught me strategies that make congressional engagement most effective. First, prepare your case and focus on one issue. Gather information and personal stories related to it. Share stories that honor the dignity and agency of the affected communities, and reflect deeply on why this matters to you personally, to your congregation, the community, and the nation. Then draft a 1 to 2 minute speech following this outline. First, identify yourself and your ministry. Express a shared value. No matter where we come from, we all want to raise our families in safety and security. Name the challenge. But our Afghan allies are under threat in their home country and are under threat of being deported today. Then share your vision. Lutheran Services in America, Global Refuge, and our affiliated ministries have a wide and long welcome for Afghan refugees and others. And then make your specific call to action. So Representative Hinson, will you join us in supporting our Afghan allies? Next, follow through is very important. It could be everything. One town hall appearance might not be enough. I returned 2 times, and Representative Hinson remembered me and Pa Lee's textile. Consistency and persistence demonstrate that this isn't just a passing concern. Speak to the whole community, not just to the representative, so that the rest of the community can hear you and support you. Your advocacy ripples outward when others witness your witness. In a sense, preach to the choir, give them a song to sing with their family members and friends and in their own personal advocacy. Use all available platforms. After the town hall, I posted on Facebook, connected digitally to people who weren't there. Social media can amplify your advocacy beyond the room. Write press releases or letters to the editor. But remember to state your case respectfully and don't speak for the representative or senator unless you're exactly sure of their response. They can speak for themselves. Finally, make or create concrete next steps. Don't just make your case and walk away. This work requires not only practical preparation, but also spiritual and emotional readiness. Center your advocacy in prayer and scripture, asking for wisdom, courage, and a spirit of love, even in difficult moments. Acknowledge that advocacy can stir strong emotions and create space to process your feelings. Set boundaries, know your limits, and practice your self-care through the process. Remember that this work is a marathon, not just a sprint. Most importantly, find courage in community. Do this with others in your congregation and across the ELCA. Draw strength from your team and from the knowledge that you are participating in God's ongoing work for reconciliation and justice. Remember, we engage not as partisan actors, but as people of faith called to advocate for justice. We may disagree with our representatives on some issues while finding common ground on others. Approach these conversations with the same grace that you'd make in a congregational visit, firm in your conviction, but gentle in spirit. Our congregations have been doing this for generations. The Vu family story reminds us that advocacy isn't abstract policy work. It's about real families seeking safety, opportunity, and dignity. When we show up at town halls, we carry forward a Lutheran tradition of welcoming the stranger and speaking the truth in love. Your voice matters. Your stories matter. And this August, when your representative or senators come home, I encourage you to be there, not just as a constituent, but as a faithful witness to God's justice and mercy. Remember that your advocacy is holy work. The Spirit of God goes before you, stands beside you, and dwells within you as you speak the truth in love. God bless you with wisdom and courage and compassion as you work toward a church that more fully reflects God's beloved community. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you to Silas Kulkarni and Reverend Wilker for their contributions to this episode. As Silas mentioned, you can head over to elca.org/advocacy to join our advocacy network, as well as find a number of other resources to help you in your own advocacy initiatives. This concludes this episode of Here I Pod. If you want to contact us, you can email us over at elcaadvocacypodcast@elca.org or leave us a voicemail at 866-740-3522. Thank you for listening.